The wind howled through the dark pine forest, whipping snowflakes against the windshield like tiny daggers. It was Christmas Eve in the remote mountains of Colorado, where the temperature had plummeted to -2 degrees, and the world felt utterly forsaken. Isabella Rivas gripped the steering wheel of her luxury SUV, her knuckles white beneath her leather gloves. The engine sputtered once more, then died completely, the dashboard lights flickering before plunging her into silence. The headlights dimmed and went out, leaving only the faint glow of the moon filtering through the heavy clouds. She checked her phone again. No signal. Not even a single bar. The road was empty, a narrow ribbon of ice winding through the wilderness miles from the nearest town. No cars had passed in the last hour, no distant lights from cabins or homes, just the relentless wind and the pounding of her heart in her chest. Isabella glanced at the clock, 11:47 p.m. In the cities below, people were gathered around fireplaces exchanging gifts under twinkling trees, their laughter mingling with holiday carols. But here she was, trapped invisible to the world that had always revolved around her schedule. Stepping out of the vehicle, she shivered violently as the cold pierced through her designer coat. Her breath formed white clouds in the air, and her hands trembled so badly she could barely lift the hood. "Not now! Please, not like this!" she muttered, her voice lost in the gale. For the first time in years, the weight of her choices crashed over her. She had skipped the family dinner in Denver, dismissing her sister's invitation with a curt email about an urgent meeting. She had turned down friends' offers for eggnog and stories by the fire, citing deadlines for a $20 million deal. Success had been her armor. Her empire built brick by brick at Rivas Holdings, but now, stranded and alone, she saw the cracks of life so busy that no one would notice if she vanished. A faint beam of light appeared in the distance, cutting through the snow like a lifeline. Isabella's pulse quickened as it grew closer, an old pickup truck, its tires crunching over the ice. She stepped back instinctively, her mind racing with warnings, a dark road, a stranger, potential danger. The truck slowed and pulled over its engine, rumbling to a stop. The door creaked open, and a man emerged, bundled in a worn jacket and gloves that had seen better days. He was in his mid-30s, with a steady gaze that held no urgency or curiosity, just calm assessment. He kept a respectful distance, raising his voice over the wind. "You okay? Looks like your car's stalled." Isabella hesitated, her eyes darting between him and the empty road. No signal on my phone." He nodded without pressing. "Christmas Eve out here, hardly anyone drives this route. Let me take a look." She watched him warily as he approached the hood, his movements deliberate and non-threatening. In that frozen moment, between the peril of the night and the uncertainty of trust, this stranger was her only option. He inspected the engine quickly, his breath fogging in the cold. "Battery's dead. If we don't get it going soon, the whole thing could freeze up." He straightened, meeting her eyes. "You can wait in my truck to warm up. No one should be out here alone on Christmas Eve." "Before we continue, please tell us, where in the world are you tuning in from? We love seeing how far our stories travel." She didn't know then that this man, Daniel Hayes, was a single father, hurrying home to his 7-year-old daughter after an extra shift at the garage, scraping together enough for her Christmas gifts. His decision to stop would unravel both their lives in ways neither could foresee. Would she trust this stranger? Who was he really? And why on a night when everyone rushed home to their own warmth did he choose to pause for someone he didn't know? The old pickup truck's engine grumbled to life, its headlights piercing the swirling snow as Daniel hooked up jumper cables from his battery to hers. Isabella stood a few feet away, arms crossed tightly against the biting cold, watching him work with a mix of apprehension and reluctant gratitude. The wind tugged at her coat, and she could feel the chill seeping into her bones, making her teeth chatter despite her efforts to stay composed. Daniel moved methodically, his gloved hands steady even in the freezing air. "We'll give it one shot," he said, his voice calm and reassuring. "If it doesn't turn over, I'll drive you into town, or to my place if that's easier. It's just a few minutes from here, and you can wait there until the tow truck can come in the morning." She glanced at her watch, 11:58 p.m. 11. The world was on the cusp of Christmas Day, and the thought of spending it stranded felt like a cruel joke. Every instinct screamed caution, a stranger's truck, a remote road, the unknown. But the alternative was worse, staying out here alone as the temperature dropped further. Daniel stepped back, signaling for her to try the ignition. The SUV whined, shuddered, and fell silent again. He shook his head, wiping snow from his brow. No luck. The cold's probably got to it already. Isabella hesitated, her mind racing through worst-case scenarios. Yet there was something in his demeanor, no pushiness, no probing questions that made her pause. He didn't crowd her. He simply waited, giving her space to decide. The wind howled louder, and she felt a shiver run down her spine that had little to do with the weather. "All right," she said finally, her voice barely audible over the gale. "Just until morning." Daniel nodded without comment, unhooking the cables and stowing them in his truck bed. He opened the passenger door for her, then walked around to the driver's side. As she climbed in, the cab enveloped her in unexpected warmth. The heater blasting mingled with faint scents of cinnamon and pine from a small air freshener dangling from the rearview mirror. It was a far cry from the leather-scented luxury of her SUV, but it felt like a refuge. Daniel slid behind the wheel, shifting into gear. "My daughter went a bit overboard with the Christmas decorations," he said with a slight smile, glancing at her briefly. "Hence the smell." She noticed a small wrapped box on the back seat tied with a simple ribbon. "For her?" Isabella asked, her curiosity slipping through her guarded tone. "Yeah," he replied, keeping his eyes on the road as they pulled away. "I picked up extra shifts the last couple of weeks to afford it. Nothing fancy, but she'll love it." The simplicity of his words struck her. Isabella leaned back, staring out at the passing trees, their branches heavy with snow. In her world of boardrooms and high-stakes negotiations, gifts were extravagant gestures, diamonds, or vacation-sealed deals. But here was a man scraping by for something small, meaningful. It reminded her of her own childhood holidays before success had isolated her family gatherings in a modest home where the value lay in the thought, not the price tag. She pushed the memory away, focusing on the present. Daniel drove in comfortable silence, at first navigating the icy curves with ease. He was a mechanic by trade, she gathered from the tools scattered in the truck bed, visible through the back window. 3 years ago, his life had shattered when his wife Emily died in a car accident on a similar snowy night. He'd been left to raise their daughter Lucia alone in their modest wooden cabin on the outskirts of a small mountain town. Money was tight, bills piled up, and he worked long hours to keep the roof over their heads. But he taught Lucia the importance of kindness without expectation, a lesson born from his own losses. Stopping for strangers wasn't new to him. It was how he honored the memory of those who'd helped him in his darkest times. As they turned onto a narrower lane, Isabella felt the tension in her shoulders ease slightly. "Thank you," she said quietly, "for stopping." He shrugged. No one deserves to be out there alone tonight. The truck slowed as a warm glow appeared ahead, a small wooden house nestled among the pines, its windows spilling golden light onto the fresh snow. Smoke curled from the chimney, and a simple string of lights outlined the porch. Before Daniel could even park, the front door burst open, and a little girl in pajamas dashed out, her dark curls bouncing. "Daddy!" she cried, waving excitedly despite the cold. Daniel parked and stepped out, scooping her up in a hug. "Hey, kiddo, what are you doing up, I was waiting for Santa," Lucia said, her eyes widening as she spotted Isabella. Without hesitation, she tugged at her father's sleeve. "Who's she? Can she stay for Christmas dinner?" Isabella climbed out, offering a tentative smile. Daniel set Lucia down and glanced at her. "This is a friend who needs some help tonight, and yeah, if she wants." The house was humble inside, worn furniture, a tiny Christmas tree adorned with handmade ornaments, but it radiated warmth. Daniel hung up their coats and gestured to the kitchen table. "Make yourself comfortable. I'll put on some tea." As Lucia chattered about her day, Isabella sat feeling out of place, yet strangely at ease. For the first time in years, she wasn't defined by her title or her schedule. Daniel didn't pry. He just prepared a simple meal, the aroma of soup and fresh bread filling the air. Over dinner, she shared a bit about her long day, omitting the details of her high-powered life. The evening unfolded quietly, a stark contrast to her usual solitude. but as the clock ticked toward midnight, Isabella couldn't shake the feeling that this chance encounter was more than a rescue. It was the beginning of something unforeseen. Was this night just a fleeting warmth, or the start of a connection that could bridge their vastly different worlds? The small wooden house felt like a sanctuary from the storm outside its walls, creaking softly under the weight of the falling snow. The golden light from the lamps cast warm shadows across the room, illuminating the simple Christmas tree with its handmade ornaments, bits of colored paper and string that Lucia had crafted with her father. Isabella sat at the kitchen table, her hands wrapped around a mug of herbal tea, watching as the little girl yawned and curled up on the sofa, her eyelids fluttering closed. The meal had been modest soup from a can, warmed bread, and some canned vegetables, but it tasted like comfort in a way that her five-star dinners never had. Daniel cleared the plates quietly, his movements efficient and unassuming, as if hosting a stranded stranger on Christmas Eve was just another part of his routine. As Lucia's breathing deepened into sleep, Isabella's phone buzzed insistently on the table, shattering the peace. She glanced at the screen, her expression tightening. Messages flooded in from her executive team. Board awaiting confirmation on the merger. Deal hangs on your signature, $20 million at stake. Where are you? Status update required. Daniel, stacking dishes in the sink, caught a glimpse of the display. His eyes widened slightly as he read her name, Isabella Rivas, followed by the corporate logo of Rivas Holdings. He paused, wiping his hands on a dish towel, but said nothing at first, resuming his task with the same steady rhythm. "You're not just anyone stuck on the road," he said finally, his voice low to avoid waking Lucia. It wasn't an accusation, more an observation. Isabella set the phone face down, her fingers lingering on it. She met his gaze, the vulnerability in her eyes contrasting with the polished confidence she usually projected. "No," she admitted. "I'm Isabella Rivas, CEO of Rivas Holdings. Real estate empire, boardrooms, the works." She waited for the shift, the awe, the opportunism, or the withdrawal she'd seen so many times before, but Daniel's expression remained neutral, almost thoughtful. He pulled out a chair and sat across from her, folding his arms on the table. "Doesn't change the fact that your car's out there freezing," he replied simply. "Tea still hot?" She nodded, surprised by his nonchalance. The silence stretched, broken only by the faint crackle of the fire in the small stove. Isabella stared into her mug, the steam rising like unspoken regrets. "You have no idea how rare that is," she said softly. "People change when they know who I am. They want favors, connections, or they back away like I'm too much to handle." Memories flooded her, building the company from a single rundown property she'd flipped at 25, sacrificing weekends, relationships, even holidays to climb the ladder. Her parents had passed early, leaving her to fend for herself, and success had become her shield. But now, at 32 with an empire worth billions, she dined alone in penthouses, her only companions emails and spreadsheets. Tonight when her car failed, no one from her world had checked in, not her assistant, not her so-called friends. The isolation hit her like the cold outside. Daniel listened without interrupting, his calloused hands resting on the table. When she finished, he leaned back slightly. "I get it in a way," he said. "Not the money part, but the loneliness. Being judged for what people think you are." He glanced at Lucia, sleeping peacefully. 3 years ago, his wife Emily had died in a freak accident on an icy road much like the one tonight, a delivery truck skidding out of control. Left with a 4-year-old and a mountain of medical bills he'd scraped by as a mechanic, turning down handouts to preserve his dignity. Neighbors whispered about the poor widower, assuming he needed pity or charity. But he focused on Lucia, teaching her that kindness wasn't a transaction. It was a choice made without expecting anything back. "People see me and think I'm just scraping by, that I jump at any help. But I don't want Lucia growing up thinking her dad only matters if he has something to offer." Isabella's eyes softened. "She's lucky to have you, teaching her that." The words carried a wistfulness she hadn't intended. For a moment, the room felt smaller, the distance between them narrowing not by words, but by shared understanding. She had power and wealth, but no one to share the quiet victories or defeats. He had simplicity and struggle, but a bond that money couldn't buy. The tension built as Isabella's phone buzzed again, a reminder of the world waiting. She silenced it, her voice barely above a whisper. "If you'd known who I was from the start, some high-profile CEO, would you have stopped?" Daniel met her gaze steadily without hesitation. "Yes." "Why?" She pressed her heart pounding. "Because you were standing there alone on that road," he said. "That's reason enough." In that instant, something shifted. Two people from opposite worlds, one armored by success, yet hollow inside, the other grounded by hardship, yet rich in integrity, saw each other not through labels or assumptions, but as they truly were, human, vulnerable, and searching for connection. The morning light filtered through the frost-laced windows of the small wooden house, casting a soft glow over the kitchen. Snow blanketed the ground outside, muffling the world in quiet beauty. Isabella stirred from the makeshift bed on the sofa where she dozed fitfully, the events of the night replaying in her mind. The scent of fresh coffee and sizzling eggs pulled her fully awake. Daniel was at the stove flipping breakfast with practiced ease while Lucia sat at the table, her small hands busy with a coloring book she'd pulled from a drawer. The girl looked up with a bright smile. "Merry Christmas, Daddy's making special eggs today." "Do you like them scrambled?" Isabella smiled back, smoothing her rumpled clothes. "Merry Christmas to you too. That sounds perfect." She joined them at the table, accepting a plate from Daniel. The meal was simple eggs toast from a loaf that looked homemade and fruit sliced into neat pieces, but in the warmth of the room it felt like a feast. Lucia chattered about her hopes for Santa's visit, showing off a handmade stocking she'd sewn with uneven stitches. Daniel watched his daughter with quiet affection, occasionally glancing at Isabella with a subtle curiosity that held no judgment. But the peace shattered with the sound of tires crunching on snow outside. Isabella's phone, which had regained a weak signal overnight, buzzed with renewed urgency. Before she could check it, a sharp knock echoed through the door. Daniel frowned, wiping his hands on a towel as he went to answer. Two men stood on the porch dressed in thick coats and looking out of place against the rustic backdrop, one her assistant Marcus, the other a board member, Edward. Their expressions were a mix of relief and impatience, eyes scanning the humble interior with barely concealed disdain. "Isabella Ms. Rivas," Marcus corrected himself quickly. "Thank God we found you. The GPS on your car led us here. The board's in an uproar. We need you back for the merger signing." Edward nodded curtly, his gaze flicking to Daniel and Lucia. "This situation could cause issues. Reporters are sniffing around already." Isabella stood, her face paling as the reality of her world intruded. Daniel remained silent, but she saw the subtle stiffening of his shoulders, the way his eyes narrowed at the men's dismissive tones. Lucia clutched her crayon tighter, sensing the shift. "Who are they, Daddy?" she whispered. "Just some people here for our guest," Daniel replied evenly, though his voice carried an undercurrent of tension. Marcus leaned in, lowering his voice, but not enough to exclude Daniel. "You can't stay here. Think of the optics, a CEO spending the night in some outskirts cabin with a stranger stocks could dip if this leaks." Isabella's cheeks flushed. "He helped me. My car broke down, I'd have frozen out there." Edward snorted softly. "Helped, or saw an opportunity. We need to get you out before this becomes a story." The words hung in the air like poison. Daniel's jaw tightened, but he said nothing, turning instead to clear the table. Isabella shot her team a sharp look. "Enough. Give me a minute." As the men waited outside, she turned to Daniel, her voice apologetic. "I'm sorry, I didn't expect them to track me down like this." He nodded, stacking plates with deliberate care. "It's your world coming to get you, I get it." His eyes met hers, a flicker of hurt beneath the calm. Lucia watched them, her small face confused. Before Isabella could respond, another vehicle pulled up, a news van, its crew spilling out with cameras. Flashes lit the snowy yard as reporters shouted questions. "Ms. Rivas, were you abducted? Who's the man inside? Is this some extortion scheme?" Daniel froze at the window, his face draining of color. He scooped Lucia into his arms, shielding her from view. "Stay inside, kiddo." The intrusion felt like a violation, the cozy home suddenly exposed. Isabella stepped out to confront them, but Marcus pulled her toward the car. "No comment," he barked at the press. "This is unrelated." "We don't know the man," The phrase echoed in Daniel's ears. Unrelated, don't know. He watched from the doorway as Isabella was ushered into the vehicle, the door slamming shut. The car pulled away, leaving tire tracks in the snow and a hollow ache in his chest. That evening, Daniel sat in the dim light of the living room, Lucia asleep beside him after a day marred by whispers from neighbors who'd seen the commotion. He scrolled through his phone, the headlines glaring, "Billionaire CEO spotted at Mechanics Shack charity or scandal," comments poured in, "Gold digger alert." Poor guy probably thought he hit the jackpot. Typical rich woman slumming it. The words stung not for himself but for Lucia. He imagined her at school facing taunts about her desperate dad. With a heavy heart, he packed a small bag, writing a note on the kitchen table. "You belong back in your world. I don't want to be the stain on your reputation. Thank you for reminding me I still have some worth, even if just for one night." He woke Lucia, gently bundling her into the truck. They drove to the bus station on the edge of town, where he planned to catch an early ride to his sister's place a few hours away from the spotlight, away from the pain of being reduced to a headline. Meanwhile, in a sleek conference room overlooking Denver's skyline, Isabella faced the board. Papers were thrust before her, the merger documents demanding her signature. But her mind was elsewhere, replaying the warmth of the kitchen, Daniel's quiet integrity. She pushed the papers away. "I'm not signing until I know they're okay." The board stared. "Who?" "The man who saved me," she said, her voice steady. "If not for him, I'd be a headline for all the wrong reasons." She stood grabbing her coat and stormed out, her heels echoing in the hallway. The realization hit her for the first time. She'd found someone who saw her beyond the title, and now, because of her world, she might have lost him forever. The snow fell heavier now, blanketing the winding roads as Isabella drove through the storm, her hands gripping the wheel so tightly her knuckles turned white. The boardroom had erupted in chaos when she stormed out, but their shouts faded behind her like distant thunder. All she could hear was the echo of Daniel's words from that note, the quiet pain in his eyes as he walked away to protect his daughter. She had spent her entire life chasing deals and building empires, but in one night, a man with nothing had shown her what it truly meant to be seen. She reached the old bus station at the edge of town, just as the last light of day bled from the sky. The platform was nearly empty, a few travelers huddled against the cold, and there, standing under the flickering fluorescent light with a small duffel bag at his feet, was Daniel. Lucia clung to his hand, her face streaked with tears, the little girl's shoulders shaking as she tried to hold back sobs. Isabella's heart fractured at the sight. She stepped out of the car, the wind whipping her coat around her legs. Daniel looked up, his expression shifting from exhaustion to guarded surprise. Lucia saw her first. "Miss Isabella," the little girl whispered, her voice cracking. Isabella crossed the platform in hurried steps, kneeling down in the snow to Lucia's level. The child threw her arms around her neck, burying her face in Isabella's shoulder. "He left because of me," Lucia sobbed. "He said people would laugh at us. At him. But I don't care about them. I just don't want Daddy to be alone again." Isabella held her tightly, her own tears falling freely. "I know, sweetheart. I know." Daniel stood a few feet away, his jaw-tight eyes fixed on the ground. When Isabella finally stood still, holding Lucia's hand, he spoke first, his voice rough. "You shouldn't be here." "I had to be," she replied, stepping closer. "I left the boardroom. I left the deal. I left everything because none of it mattered when I realized I was about to lose the only place that ever felt like home." Daniel's eyes finally met hers, raw with pain and disbelief. "You heard what they said. Unrelated. Don't know him. I'm just the guy who fixed your car. That's all I'll ever be to your world." Isabella shook her head, her voice trembling but fierce. "No. You're the man who stopped when everyone else drove past. You're the man who opened his door to a stranger on Christmas Eve. You're the man who taught me that love isn't about what you have. It's about who you choose to stand beside when the world tries to pull you apart." She reached out and took his hand, cold from the snow, and placed it over her heart. "I don't need you to save me anymore, Daniel. I just need you to stay. With me. With Lucia. With all of us." For a long moment, the only sound was the wind and Lucia's quiet sniffles. Then Daniel's fingers tightened around hers and the wall he had built around his heart finally crumbled. "I'm scared," he admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. "Terrified of ruining this. Of not being enough." Isabella stepped into his arms, resting her forehead against his chest. "Then be scared with me," she whispered. "Because I'm terrified too, but I'd rather be terrified beside you than safe without you." Lucia slipped between them, wrapping her small arms around both their waists. In the falling snow under the dim light of the old bus station, three people who had each known the ache of abandonment found something they had stopped believing in. A promise, not of perfection, not of wealth or status, just a promise to stay, to choose each other, to build a family not from blood or money, but from the quiet courage of never turning away. And in that moment on a cold Christmas Eve that had begun with a broken car and a broken heart, they finally understood the greatest truth of all. Sometimes the most beautiful love stories don't start with fireworks. They start with a stranger who refuses to drive past. They start with a little girl who believes in second chances. They start with the simple, brave decision to stay.